Hey everyone, Mr. Toady here. Welcome back to another flipped lesson. And this is actually the first lesson for our Anatomy and Physiology class. And in this lesson, we're going to be doing an intro to the human body and orientation, just getting some few beginning things out of the way here as we start to explore our class of Anatomy and Physiology and understanding the human body. So as we go along, make sure you know these objectives. If you want, take a screenshot right now so you can go back and refer to them later. And at the end of the lesson, if you're not sure of these, I would go back, rewatch it until you understand them. So first off, we're going to start by talking about what is anatomy and physiology. Okay, so anatomy is study of the structure of body parts and their relation to one another. Okay, so the actual structure of a body part, what makes them up, and we can talk about really, really small levels, really, really big levels. And the physiology aspect is the function of the body parts. And this is something that you definitely heard before in biology class. Probably one of the big ideas of just science in general, not just life sciences, is that you have this complementary idea of structure and function. And we always say that structure determines function, or structure dictates function, right? So what does that mean? In anything, and especially in life and the human body, the structure or anatomy, right, of how something is built determines the function or the physiology of that aspect. So this, again, is really one of those key ideas. And as we study anatomy and physiology, it's going to be really, really important that we remember the structure determines function, because really that's what it comes down to when we study every organ system throughout the body. And a great example of that would be the eye, right? On this side here, we have all these different structures that are within an eyeball, which we'll get to know later on in the year. And you have everything from the cornea, the pupil, the iris, the sclera, the retina, the optic nerve, right? I mean, so many, you get so details with the eyeball, which is a really complex organ because it does so many great functions. So that's the anatomy, the actual structure. But how does an eye actually work? If I were to just show you a picture here of this eyeball on the left, you wouldn't really be able to tell me necessarily unless you had some good guesses about how we actually get that image that we see back into our brain to interpret. That's more the physiology side, right? And that goes just beyond biology. That involves some physics too, with light, how it bounces off thing and refracts, how it goes through lenses, how it goes through a cornea, how it goes through a lens in here, goes back to our retina, and then gets converted into a nerve signal through the optic nerve that goes to our brain that interprets it, right? So it's really important as we study anatomy and physiology this year to remember that it's crucial to know both parts of an organ system, a tissue, whatever we're talking about. We need to understand the anatomy. We need to understand all the parts of that organ to be able to understand the physiology, how it actually functions, and what that means for the human body. Okay, so big idea here. Structure determines function. All right, so we have a couple subdivisions of anatomy. Okay, we can view anatomy on the gross, and not gross like, oh, gross, right? Although you might think it's gross. The gross level, or macroscopic, right? Which means big. They're things that we could see, visible with the naked eye, right, is gross anatomy, or macro. That the prefix macro means big, macroscopic, okay? And we can see this on a regional level, at the surface, a systemic level. A great example here would be this cat cadaver we see here. You know, you could see all sorts of different organisms just without a microscope, without really digging into it. You could see it with the naked eye. We could see intestines. We could see stomach. We could see lungs. We could see a heart. We could see a trachea. We could see ribs. We could see a pelvis. We could see muscles, okay? That's all gross anatomy, or macroscopic, things we could see with the eye. Opposite of macroscopic, we have microscopic, right? Things that you would need a microscope to see. So really, really small parts of the anatomy. And kind of two subcategories of that. We could have cytology, so the study of cells. So maybe you're looking at red blood cells in the cardiovascular system, all right? And we could have histology, which is the study of tissues. And we'll, next slide here, we'll see, and hopefully you remember from biology, right? Tissues are groups of cells. And you can see here, this is a whole group of cells here, right, that make up a tissue. And we have a couple basic types of tissues, which we'll talk about in our first couple weeks of class. All right. And our third subdivision of anatomy would be developmental anatomy or embryology. And that's how we study the changes that occur before birth, right? And I love this picture here. I love this graphic that maybe you've seen it before. And it shows the development from that zygote, that embryo, one cell here, and how it develops over a certain amount of weeks and the changes, right? I mean, week one or two over here, you really can't see much. By 15 or 16, we look like some kind of lizardy thing with a tail. And finally, over here, 23, we start to see something that looks like a human, right? But there's all sorts of changes that are going on as we develop in utero and grow into the human beings that we are. And there's tons we could learn from that aspect of anatomy and physiology. So again, another subdivision. So these are your three major subdivisions, and we'll talk about these as we learn throughout the year the different organs, organ systems, and how those work towards the human body. All right. And again, so physiology, right? Focusing events at cellular and molecular level and how the body works, right? Structure is the anatomy, physiology is the function. And like I said, a lot of these things have to do with the chemical and physical properties, right? Light is something that you learned about freshman year in physical science, okay? And how light moves, how it bends, how it refracts, mirrors, lenses. But guess what? That does play into biology. All right, so here's something definitely that you should remember from biology class. And this is the levels of structural organization, right? So when we're studying not just human anatomy and physiology, but any living organism, we need to be able to classify what level we're working at, because some scientists may only look at the smallest level, things on a chemical level or a cellular level inside a cell. If you're studying certain proteins, so you could spend your whole life right here on the chemical level. Other scientists may look all the way up as big as an organism, right? So these are the levels that we go. Chemical, cellular, group of cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs make up organ systems down here. And then your organ systems make up an organism. All right, so it's really important to remember these levels, because as we look at we're looking at humans, but as we're looking at all the organ systems of a human, we're going to go further down and see how the cellular level affects all the different organ systems. All right. So make sure you know these, okay, as we go through. Super, super important there. All right. So survival needs, right? What do we need to survive as humans? A couple things. And the beautiful thing about all life on Earth is that all life, again, coming back from biology, is super well adapted to survive in its own niche or niche, right? Like a certain area of the environment where it really thrives. And we all share the characteristics of life, and some organisms are better at others and surviving in certain areas. So when we're talking about humans, right? What are some things that we really need to survive? Well, nutrients, right? We need the basic stuff of life. We need stuff to make the macromolecules. We need stuff to make our proteins and enzymes so our body can function properly. And then along with that, we need the food, we need the energy to keep our metabolism going. So we need nutrients. Oxygen, obviously, right? We need that. We need to breathe in oxygen so that our cells can do cellular respiration to make energy. Water, we need water so that we could do cell respiration. Our body is made up of mostly of water. So all the cells are saturated in some type of fluid material, your blood, the cytoplasm in your cells. So we need lots and lots of water to survive. Normal body temperature, right? 98.6 or 37 degrees Celsius is our normal body temperature. And if you look at the extremes, right, in really, really hot environments, we start to see really crazy things happening to the body. Organ systems shut down because we can't control everything. So everything's getting too cooked, right? Our proteins start to denature and change shape. And same thing if we get really, really cold, right? If your body gets too cold, your organs shut down because they can't metabolize, they can't break down that energy properly, and everything starts to shut down and go to sleep. Then finally, atmospheric pressure, right? Something that maybe you wouldn't think about at first, but this comes into key, especially like where different places, where different organisms or different humans may live across the globe, right? A great example is if the highest mountain on Earth, right, Mount Everest, the atmospheric pressure is actually so much lower up there that it kind of correlates with this. There's less oxygen in the air. You can't survive at the top of there unless you're on supplemental oxygen. Okay, so we could see pressure affecting us all over many different spots. But again, these are the basic survival needs that we have for the anatomy, the structure of our vital functions, of our vital parts of our anatomy that keep us alive. All right, so here's a big word that I know you remember from biology, and it goes back to those survival needs, right? Homeostasis is maintaining a stable internal environment, right? And that's key to surviving. If you think about all the functions and all the organ systems that we're going to talk about, they all come back to helping your body maintain homeostasis, keeping that homeo, which is same, stasis state, inside your body so that your cells can continue to do the work that they do to drive your metabolism and to keep you alive. Okay. So we have all those survival needs that we just talked about that go into homeostasis, but we also have other things that keep us alive through reacting to different things, right? Another characteristic of life, react to stimuli. And we have, what we call feedback loops. And we have two types here, but the main idea is there's three parts. We have some sort of input from a receptor. That signal goes to a control center, and then we have some type of effector or response, right? So if you come into the classroom and I have the lights off and I jump out of the closet and try and scare you, right? That's a stimulus, that's an input. That stimulus goes to your brain or your spinal cord for a control center, which tells you what to do. Oh, there's a scary man jumping out of the closet. I'm going to run and yell and run away, right? The response. So there's two major ways, and that's helping us maintain homeostasis, because to maintain that stable internal environment, we need to have what you maybe have heard of as the fight or flight response, right? We need to be able to react with our bodies to survive. So two major feedback loops or types, right? We have a negative feedback loop, which reduces the effect of a stimulus. So we have some type of stimulus that happens. If it's a negative feedback loop, it actually reduces it or makes it smaller. So examples would be body temperature, breathing rate, blood sugar levels. So great example, you go to lunch, maybe you're coming in for breakfast, you eat a dozen donuts, right? Your blood sugar level is through the roof. Your body senses that and it says, oh man, I need to get some sugar out of my system because it is way too high right now. It needs to go get stored in our cells. Your body's going to release a hormone called insulin, which lets it in, right? Think about it. Your sugar went really, really high, and now your body's bringing it back down until you get to a normal rate. That's negative feedback, okay? Whereas the opposite would be a positive feedback, which is when you have that receptor or that input or stimulus, it goes to the control center. Instead of bringing it down, it drives it way up. It keeps going and going and going until it's accomplished the task. Two great examples: childbirth, labor contractions, right? When a mother starts to go into labor, hormones are released. The uterus starts to contract to try and push that baby out the birth canal. And it releases more hormones, and more hormones, and more hormones, until eventually it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The contractions get smaller and closer together, and it pushes that baby out. Same thing with blood clotting, right? If you've ever had a bloody nose or you've gotten a cut or something, right? You're bleeding. Your blood needs to clot itself on its own. Well, that's a positive feedback loop, because once blood starts to clot, you get more blood to clot with that. The platelets start to affect each other, and it gets higher and higher and higher and higher, more clotting until you've stopped that bleeding. So really important to understand those feedback loops, and we're going to go over this more in class. But the main idea is you have a receptor, goes to a control center, and you get a response. And these are your two types. So when we can't, let me clear some of this writing off here. When we can't maintain homeostasis, right? Whether because of feedback loops not working and not being able to respond, or some of the other things we talked about in the last slide, temperature, right? Oxygen, nutrients. If we have any of those things that are like an imbalance, right? We can't maintain homeostasis. That's when we result in disease, death, and illness, right? A great example, not being able to maintain your blood sugar levels, that's a disease called diabetes, okay? So that homeostasis, if we're not, and in biology, we talk about homeostasis all the time, but what does it mean? In anatomy and physiology, we really get to learn that in individual organ systems, if we're not maintaining homeostasis, that's where we're going to see certain diseases like diabetes, right? You can see other diseases where, maybe you have a heart condition, right? And pericarditis, okay, inflammation of the heart sac. Again, or the pericardium around the heart. If something's wrong with that and those cells aren't maintaining homeostasis, that's going to result in disease. So homeostasis is so huge here as we learn anatomy. So remember that and keep that in mind. All right, so that's the end for this lesson, guys. It was a quick one, just a couple main points to get out of the way here. So go back, review those points, and be ready for the quiz when you come into school for hybrid learning. So stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next one.